Amen. Well, if you open up your Bibles to the book of Genesis, chapter 37. Genesis, chapter 37. Once you've found your place, please stand out of the reverence for reading the Word of God. Like I said, we're going to be doing a little bit of a character study here. It's going to take place this morning and this evening. And so we'll be looking at three different portions of text, not necessarily all this morning, but we'll be looking at three different portions of text as we look at the life of Joseph. And as you find your place, we're going to begin reading in verse 1. Genesis chapter 37, beginning in verse 1. The Bible says, "And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father, and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? Verse 11, And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. Let's pray. Lord, I do pray that you'd use this text and use our character study this morning, this evening, as we look at the life of Joseph. Lord, I pray that it would impact our minds and our thoughts as to what it means to, Lord, be used of God. Lord, in your name I pray. Amen. You may be seated. This morning, as we look at this text, I've entitled it, The Faithfulness of God in the Molding of a Man. The faithfulness of God in molding of a man. Again, we'll be looking at a couple texts as we move through his life here in a short period of time. But Joseph, as we look at him, you kind of got to read between the lines. Let's put it this way: you've got a family that has a total of 11 brothers inside this family. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever had siblings, which most of us have, siblings tend to some of the times fight. No, not you. You never did that. No, okay. But these siblings did. In fact, they fought quite often. Now, this young boy comes along, and he gets born to his father Jacob at an old age. So he was special to him. He was unique to him because he was born at such an older age, and he treated him that way. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the last kid that tends to come along gets it easy. I don't know why. It's just kind of the way it is. Maybe mom and dad are worn out by that time, and they just don't feel like beating you as much as they did the first one. But the first one usually gets a little more upset about it. I know that because I was the last born in my family. But there's a natural fight between the firstborn and the youngest, isn't there? I mean, there really is. It was that way with me and my sister. We didn't get together and get to well too long for quite a while. And that was the case here. But what made it even worse was his own father, Jacob, made it very clear where his love lied. In fact, if you looked at the historical context of this, who was the one that was supposed to receive the gifts, the praises, the attention within the family? The oldest boy, Reuben. Reuben should have been the one that got all the attention from Dad, should have been the one that got the second helping of the blessing. He should have been the one that he bestowed gifts on, that he made a leader within the boys. He should have been the one that was in charge of the boys as they were working, told them where to go, how to do it, and what to do. But who was doing that? Joseph. Now you tell me if that doesn't ruffle your feathers as a brother, knowing you are the oldest. You are the one to receive the special blessing of the family, and yet your little brother is the one that your dad bestows blessings upon. Your little brother is the one that he cares the most for, and your little brother is the one he sends to go give you orders. That doesn't sit too well. It wouldn't sit too well with me. It wouldn't sit too well with you. Now, put yourself in the life of Joseph for just a minute. Again, we're reading between the lines a little bit in this, but Joseph, although he was an obedient son, do you think he might have had a little bit of an attitude to go with it? Yeah, I would say so. And it would be almost impossible to avoid. Your dad has made it very clear, you are the special, you are the chosen son. You are the special one, and he treats you as such. So at that age, I'm sorry, when you're younger and you get treated like a brat, you turn into a brat. Now, he was obedient, but yet he rubbed it kind of in his brother's faces, I'm sure. You know, his dad made him a coat of many colors. You can kind of almost see him walking up saying, "Hey guys, oh, I got a little something on the coat Daddy gave me. Oh, good thing I got that off. It's a nice coat, isn't it?" You could almost see him just kind of a little bit of an attitude that goes along with it. He was spoiled. He got gifts given to him on a regular basis by his father. In fact, he bestowed a very special gift, that coat of many colors, so that it was known to everyone that he was his favorite. Now, I don't know about you, but that is cardinal rule number one as a parent. You do not show favor to one child over another unless they're your only child, and then you can tell them you're your favorite and you're my least favorite. You don't like the second part, but I was picking on Andrew when I said that because I knew he was sitting right there. But, unless you've only got one child, you don't make it obvious. You can't. Now, obviously there's differences in a family, but you can't make it that obvious, and Jacob did, and he caused the fight and the tensions within the family. As the youngest, he shouldn't receive this unique treatment. Reuben should have been the one receiving this unique treatment. And again, you could almost imagine as he would tell his brothers what to do, he'd do it kind of with a smile, like, "You can't touch me. Go ahead. Tell me something. Tell me what you think. I'll tell Dad." You could just see that on him. So he kind of had a little bit of a brattiness about him. I don't know whose phone that is. Yeah. But you can almost imagine him as he talked to his brothers with kind of a smirk on. How could you imagine someone like this one day becoming the leader not only of his family, but one day becoming the leader of a nation? That would be a hard thing to imagine, wouldn't it? It would take an awful big hand of God to mold a man like that into a leader, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what he did. We're going to look at three specific things, circumstances in the life of Joseph that God used to mold him into the man that he needed to be. Most everyone knows the story of Joseph being second in command of Egypt. Why? Because it's an exciting story to tell. We tell it in movies, we tell it in kids' books, we tell it to our children in Sunday school class. Why? Because it's a cool story about him being second in command, telling everyone what to do. But we miss and gloss over all the stuff that it took to get there. Everyone likes reading the end of the story where the hero wins, but they don't like reading about the part where he lost things along the way. We know about him telling of 7 good years and then 7 years of famine, him being placed in a position of power over his brothers where he would then have the opportunity to forgive them. We think of promotions today as a natural part of working in a place. You go start at the bottom. You're the gopher. You're the dude that does everything nobody else wants to do. When you start, the guy that was hired before you goes, here is the toilet brush and here is the plunger. And you look at him and go, what? You're the new guy, man. It's yours. We think of promotions as starting off from the bottom and working our way up the top and eventually becoming a very important person within the company. Because why? That's how you want to live. But yet Joseph didn't follow the same corporate ladder as everyone else. Most people love reading about rags to riches stories. His was riches to rags. His was the exact opposite. As we look at this, we're going to see Joseph's was not the typical life of acceleration through the program. But yet God was with him through every situation, leading him to become the man he needed to be to fulfill the job he would one day possess. While Joseph was not perfect, he did have 2 very important qualities that are to be found in anyone who is to be a leader or to be a Christian serving God. The 2 things he possessed was obedience and being teachable. If you can find a person who's obedient and teachable, you found someone you can make something out of. And that was him. He was obedient to his father, and he was teachable. He was willing to learn. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of circumstances will it take for God to form and shape you into the Christian that He intends you to be? And when those circumstances come along, how will you respond to it? Joseph at any point during these circumstances we're going to look at could have just given up and said, you know what, I'm not interested in this. He could have pouted and sat there and quit on life. And guess what? We would have never had this text to read. Joseph, in fact, would not have become one of the 12 sons who would become one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He would have just disappeared. We might have only had 11 tribes, who knows? But he would have just poofed off the pages of Scripture because he chose to kick back against the chastening and the correction and the molding of God. That's the same thing for us. When God's just trying to mold us, to shape us, a lot of times it's a painful process. And if we kick back and we fight back and say, I'm not interested, God will pull back just as he could have with Joseph. So as we look at this, we have to understand that we have to have the same attitude, the same obedience, and the same teachableness that Joseph had in these circumstances. But we're going to look at the molding of a man, first of all, as he learned wisdom at his father's house. He learned wisdom at his father's house. Again, we've talked about this already, but Joseph was Jacob's very favorite. Today's word would be he was a snitch, tattletale. He was the one you didn't want around when you were getting ready to do something that you knew you shouldn't. Everyone knew that. You had the kid in the group that you say, all right, we're fixing to go over here and do something. Just look the other way. Because if you see it, you're going to tell our mom, you're going to tell my dad, just get lost for a couple minutes. That was him. He was the snitch. When they saw him coming, they went, oh, great, here comes Joseph. What's he going to tell Dad about us now? Jacob at this time, he was 108 years old, and Joseph was his eyes and his ears outside the home. Instead of doing manual labor, he was the one going to and forth from his brothers, reporting on what they did. Now that shouldn't have been his position. He should have been the boy that was sitting there getting the food and getting the drinks for everyone while they were all working hard, and Reuben should have been the one that was being the intermediary between the brothers and his dad. But his dad had it backwards. He was treated very different. In verses 3 through 4, we saw that his love for him was uniquely bestowed in a gift, a coat of many colors. Now to you and me, we'd sit there and go, well, why did he want a tie-dye jacket? Well, the point of it was colors were hard to come by. Dyes were very expensive. So to have a coat that was multicolored meant he spent a great sum of money to obtain that coat. It was not an inexpensive item to obtain. It was very costly. So when he gave it to him, he might as well have put a diamond ring on his hand. It was like if you want to tell a woman how much you care about her, you get a bigger old rock so she can just kind of do this so all the other ladies will see it. And she can kind of just stretch out, do that, so they all see what she's got there. This is the guy's version of it, I guess. He gave him the fanciest jacket he could so he could see there was something special about him. This ended up putting a wall between his brothers, as it would anybody else. Joseph's arrogance, it's kind of almost impossible to avoid. Like I said, you could call him a victim of his circumstances if you wanted to. It was almost impossible for him to avoid being like that. His father set him up above his brothers and against him so that there was no doubt where his love stood. He had created a brat, and he'd created hatred within his other 10 sons. But the icing on the cake is yet to be applied. The icing on the cake comes when the Lord gives him a vision. We see in verses 5 through 11, Joseph was given visions of the future. While it's true, Joseph was not perfect, and nobody is, Joseph was still an obedient and teachable person, and the Lord knew it. So he gave him a special gift. He brought him visions. In fact, we know the fact that he would tell on his brothers, not necessarily just to be a tattletale, but he was an honest person. He would tell of their evil reports. So they did evil, which inherently flips it to say that he wasn't. God chose him to save his family and to save a nation. But all this spoiled son knew at the time was that he was having dreams of his brothers bowing down to him. And I'll tell you, that's a strong dream to have. I don't know about you, but you ever had a dream where you got one up over the person that was always the one putting you down? That was a good dream. Kind of woke up with a smile on your face going, I want to go back to sleep. That Joseph wakes up after having this dream of all of his brothers bowing down to him. And I'm sorry, you cannot put this any other way. You don't go up to your brother and say, guys, I had a dream. It probably means nothing, but I hate saying it, but you guys bowed down to me. I imagine he came up and said, guys, you'll never believe what I dreamed. Every one of you bowed down to me. That's right. You could almost see a smirk on his face. And why wouldn't he? I mean, come on, we're talking real people. These aren't Bible characters. This is a real live person who lived with real brothers who were not exactly best friends with him, and he knew it. So I doubt he came up to them cautiously and carefully. In fact, he wouldn't have even told them if he didn't want to kind of rub it in their face. But when he told them this dream, it made them hate him all the more. You could almost imagine the smugness on his face as he told them. He told them, first of all, he dreamt of sheaves. Sheaves were simply a collection of wheat or barley. They would just tie it up and they would throw it down so they could easily carry it back. He said, I had a dream that my sheaf that I made stood up, and all your other 10 stood up and bowed down to mine. He dreamt of stars. He said that as he looked out, the 10 stars and then the moon and the sun bowed down to him. When his dad heard the dream, he had no doubt what it meant. He said, son, are you saying that you think even mom and dad are going to bow down to you? So you got to sit here and think. Even Joseph or even Jacob sat back and went, whoa, boy, I love you. But did you just say what I think you just said? Even his father had to stand back at it and go, whoa. And he said that he observed the saying. He said it was a hard thing to hear. He had to sit back and soak that in. So now we move again quickly into the story. Now he heads for a trap. We know the story. He was sent out once again to check on his brothers and bring them food, spy on them basically. He can't find them, so he asks around. They tell him where they're at. And as he's heading there, we see them all grouping together and saying, oh, here comes that dreamer. I tell you what we'll do. We'll take care of those dreams. And they decide they're going to kill him. But yet Reuben steps in and says, no, we can't do that to Dad. So they come up with a better idea. Now Reuben wasn't involved in this part of it, but they dug a pit and they threw him in. And then they see a group of people coming by that are slave traders. And they go, well, man, you're right. It'd be a terrible thing to kill him when we can make money off of him. Let's sell the kid. Let's get rid of him. So they sell him off into slavery. They plot again to destroy him. And instead they send him on to become a slave. You got to imagine what was going through the mind of Joseph as he hung out in this pit. This wasn't childhood games anymore. They weren't wrestling him. They weren't punching him in the gut. They weren't telling him all the things they thought about him. He could overhear them talking and plotting his death. He thought, this is serious. It's over now. You can imagine him thinking, man, what happened to these dreams? What happened to my freedom? And then they come along and they sell him into slavery. You can see him traveling away in a caravan, looking in the distance, seeing as his father, his friends, his farm, and his very freedom were sucked away from him in just a moment. Joseph would one day need great wisdom to uphold his position as the second in command of Egypt. While his father set up Joseph to become a brat, God would use his brother's hatred for him to teach him a very important lesson in wisdom. Here he learns some truths that David would later summarize in the book of Proverbs. He said in Proverbs 21:23, whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. Also Proverbs 29:11, a fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards. In other words, don't tell all you know. He learned a very important lesson about wisdom and about how to apply it. And you know how we know he learned this lesson? Because if you'll fast forward to when he meets his brothers and they don't recognize him, what does he not do? He doesn't immediately go, oh, guys, it's you. It's me. Yeah, you, me. Hey. No, he doesn't do all that. He keeps his mouth shut because wisdom is knowing when to speak and when not to. He sat back and held his tongue because he wanted to know how they'd been treating his father and how his father was, and if they were truly repentant before he opened his mouth and spoke. So we know he learned the lesson of when to speak and when not to. We know he learned the lesson of wisdom. Because when you become a Christian, God didn't call us to just simply sit and soak. He has work for us to do. And before you can do that, he has to mold you into the person. And one of the characteristics that he was missing was the better part of wisdom, was learning when to speak and when not to. And he needed to learn that lesson. And I guarantee you, as he traveled off on that caravan, he sat there and thought, oh, to the Lord, if I just kept my mouth shut. Lord, why did I have to open my mouth? Anybody else ever been there before? Oh, Lord, if I just kept my mouth shut. Why did I have to open my mouth? Look what trouble I've got myself into. That's exactly the lesson he learned. This would be a painful lesson, but the potter had big changes to make in this lump of clay before he could make him into the man he needed to be, and this was one of the ways to do it. The Bible tells us that God's in control, but some of the times we find ourselves living in unbearable circumstances. They could be of our own doing, or they could simply be the events that unfolded upon us. But guaranteedly, they're the molding hand of God in our lives. Though Joseph could not predict how his situation would improve, how things would change, he just simply had no choice but to continue to be obedient, to continue to serve, to be a slave, to be teachable. That was all he had left. Psalm 37, we read this already as our opening text, but Psalm 37, 23 through 24, he said, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. He delighteth in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with his hand." He said the steps of a good man are ordered. They're directed. They're shaped, they're focused, they're pointed by the Lord. So you sit there and look at your circumstance and say, Lord, there's no way you're in control of what's going on. It could be that you're just like Joseph. He's got you in a molding position. He's got you somewhere where it's rough and it's not easy, but He's going to change something in your life that there's no other way to do it but to make a big change. I think most of us could say there was points in our lives where it was like it was a crossroads. We had to make a decision, and neither one of them were that great. But when we made it, we can look back now and see the changes it made in our lives, and that if that thing hadn't happened, who knows where we'd have been. I know for me, again, my path to salvation is probably not much different than yours. It just wasn't a natural path that just fell out. God had to put me in a place where I absolutely needed Him. It had to be obvious to me. And if you look at the situations, you go, man, that just doesn't seem fair. And no, it's not. But life's never been promised to be fair. But yet God can use those situations to mold you. So as we looked, first of all, we looked at the life of Joseph. We see how God was able to mold him and to teach him wisdom at his father's house. Secondly, we want to see that he learned integrity at Potiphar's house. Go to Genesis chapter 39. Just a little bit over. Genesis chapter 39. We're going to pick up another part of the life of the story of Joseph. He would learn integrity at Potiphar's house. We're going to read the text here. So like I said, we're looking at a couple different texts, so we're going to read this one. Verse 1. "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house. And all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and well favored. And it came to pass after these things, that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not that what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hands. There is none greater than this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her, or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and fled, and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. And he came in unto me to lie with me, and crieth with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me, and fled, and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spoke unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought up unto us came unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard these words of his wife, which she had spoken to him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound. And he was there in the prison. So we unfold a story. Joseph has been sold into slavery. He's entered into this house of Potiphar. He was an officer of Pharaoh. He said that he was a captain of the guard. He was a very important, well-to-do man. He became a slave within this house. And as he served within this house, he served faithfully. He did his work, and God's hand was on him. And as he worked, he slowly became more important within the household, till eventually he became the very leader of all the servants in the house, so much so that he said he trusted everything in his hands. And he said he knew nothing about the status of his money, of his savings, of anything in the house, but yet the bread that was set before him. So you imagine this. You're the owner of a business, and a man comes in, and you trust him so much that you hand him your checkbook, you hand him the keys to your house, the spare keys to your cars. He has everything. He has access to all you have because he is that trusted. The only thing you know is that when it comes to write a check, you know the check's good because he said it was. When it comes time to sit down to dinner, you know dinner will be there because he'll make sure it is. That's how trusted Joseph was in this house. Joseph, in this instance, would learn a lesson that's a hard lesson to learn, but he'd learn a lesson of integrity. You know, before Joseph could be trusted to maintain the whole wealth of a nation, he would have to learn how to maintain the wealth of one person. And notice this, it wasn't his to have. Can you imagine managing an entire fund of someone's money and you make nothing off of it? That, I don't know about you, but there aren't a whole lot of 401k managers that do it for free. I hadn't met one yet. There aren't a whole lot of people that manage hedge funds, that do stock brokering, do any of that for free. They do it to make money. Joseph was a slave. Benefiting his house did no benefit to him whatsoever. But yet he did right because it was right. And he would then be faced with one of the strongest problems of integrity within his lifetime. And we're going to look at that here. While Joseph was in his while his father did not hold anything back from Joseph at home, he would have to learn to restrain himself here in this house. You know, when he was at home, he could have whatever he wanted. If he asked for it, it was his. You could almost imagine he might have been able to go up to his father Jacob and say, "Hey, Reuben's got a new pair of sandals. Those new Nike sandals, I want them." You could almost imagine his dad saying, "Reuben, take off your Nike sandals. Give them to your brother." I mean, it was that obvious. So in this house, he had to learn restraint in a way that he hadn't known before. But when we see him here, we're going to find, first of all, that he was diligent with what he was given. How do we know that? Because it said in verse 2, it said that, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So God was with him. He prospered him. The evidence of God showed in his life. You know, it takes you back to an example of Daniel. You know, when Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all showed up, they showed up to the country of Babylon, and when they showed up, it was an empire. They had nothing to do with God, had no interest in Him, but yet four men basically changed the face of that culture just because they were faithful to God, because they prayed when they were told not to, because they said that even though the king's meat is supposed to be our portion, give me pulp, give me vegetables to eat and water, and you'll see what happens. He was able to change a whole entire nation by his faith. And that was the same kind of evidence that showed in the life of Joseph. When he got there was just something different about him, and he knew it. I don't know about you, but if I was sold into slavery, I would probably not be the best slave in your house. In fact, I might be trying to find a way to escape. I might be trying to find the job as maybe taking care of the horses so I could maybe train one on the side to run with me and try to get back to my house. And when I got back, I'd be taking care of my brothers. But yet that's not what he did. He found it, and he took this opportunity as an opportunity to truly show his integrity to this man. He owed it nothing to him because he'd done nothing worthy of being sold into slavery, but yet he worked hard and he was diligent. He was diligent with what he was given, and God prospered him. Because Joseph was obedient to God, God made his life to prosper. So as a result, Joseph was promoted. We see that in verses 4 through 6, that he became favored by Potiphar. Now imagine this. You're a slave within this house. You might even have grown up in this house, because a lot of slaves they were. They would be born in the house and be a slave of the house their whole life. And all of a sudden some new slave comes in and thinks he's going to show you what to do. Guess what? It's no different in the workplace it is as being in this position either. You go to work and some new person steps in and all of a sudden it's got a position of importance and you go, wait a second, I've been here. Who are you? So I imagine he still was not the favorite amongst the other slaves. You know, he's kind of like the kid that comes into school and that helps the teacher with everything. Yeah, the teacher loves him, but the students can't stand him. And that's the way Joseph was. He was a hard worker, and as a result, God prospered him, and he was promoted within his position. Even though Joseph had every right to be a free man, he willingly bowed to the knee and became a servant to Potiphar. He chose to be the best in whatever he did. You know, as a Christian, there's small jobs in this church that need to be done, and if they're done well, it doesn't matter if they get the attention of other people. They're important. You know, pastors asked Titus, and Titus is a great person for this. He is very meticulous. I don't know if you know this, but Titus is very meticulous. Everything has to be done just a certain way. So pastor asked him to straighten out the songbooks after church, and I'll tell you, he does a good job at it. And it's not just because he's my son. I've seen him. He's way more OCD than I am. Trust me. When I was young, I was that way. In fact, my mom said I gave away toys if they didn't have a spot on my shelf. Now I'm like, spot on the shelf, there's a box, just throw it in there, we're good. But, you know, when I was a kid, I was that way. I was very meticulous about what I did. And Joseph, you know, this was the way he was. He was very meticulous in his work. He was a hard worker, and as a result, it was noticed, and God blessed his work. He chose to do the best in whatever he did, even if it seemed like a small, minuscule job. And, you know, I take that again back to our church. You know, you can't expect God to turn you into the next greatest missionary if you're not faithful right where you're at. It doesn't work that way. God doesn't just step into a pool of people standing around twiddling their thumbs and say, hey, you, I need you to do something really important. No. Have you noticed at work, the person that works the hardest also gets the most work? Anyone ever notice that? I saw a meme that was passing around that I thought was funny. It said, you know, I've got this really cool job where I work at, you that shared it, said I've got this really cool job at work that the more work you do, the more they give you other people's work. You know, and it's true. You work at a place, if you put hard effort in, they notice it. And when someone's slacking behind, guess who gets to pick up the slack? You do. And it's not necessarily because they're trying to bury you in work. It's because they know they can trust you. So they give you more because they trust you with more. And, you know, that's the same thing in the Christian life. You can't expect God to just drop in on you and just say, hey, I'm going to give you something big to do, if you weren't doing something small too. If you weren't doing something faithfully right where you're at. And that's where Joseph was. He was faithful in the little things, and God was able to give him bigger things. You know, you can bring that back to the great lesson of in the book of Proverbs, as it gave. Not in the book of Proverbs. As Jesus was giving a proverb, speaking about the talents. He said he gave 1 talent to one man, to another man he gave 2 talents, to another man he gave 5 talents. And at the end, when he returned back, the one man with the 5 talents had doubled it to 10. The man with 2 talents had over doubled it to 5. And the one man with the 1 talent, what did he do with it? He buried it. He just set it aside because he was scared of what would happen. And the master said, you know I'm a hard man. You know I expect to reap where I sow, and even in places I haven't sown. He said, but yet you took it and you just put it in the dirt because you are a lazy and unprofitable servant. Did that man get a benefit? No. He said, go out into outer darkness. He said, step out of here. He said, go out. Now, we're not giving a reference for the fact that you lose your salvation for not working. That wasn't the point of it. The point of it was the fact that you receive rewards when you're working and you lose rewards when you don't. And that was the point here. He was willing to work even in the small things, and as a result, God could trust him with bigger things. So again, this would be another time of molding in the life of Joseph. He would become promoted. His work was blessed. Everything he was put in charge of in Potiphar's house was trusted to him, and there were no checks. There were no balances. There was no following up on him. You know, wouldn't you like to know that you're so trusted at work that your boss doesn't even follow up with you? He says, I need you to do this, and he just walks away and leaves it to you because he knows that you'll do it. You know the employees that he doesn't because every half an hour it's, hey, how's it coming? What's going on? You doing it? What are you doing there? It's not necessarily that they're trying to micromanage you. It's just because to get it done, they got to keep cracking the whip. But Joseph wasn't that way. His faithfulness was so well known that Potiphar entrusted him with his entire well-being. You realize that Joseph had the ability to go write a check out of that man's bank account if you were to put it in today's terminology? That's like you handing over power and handing over your debit card, your credit cards, and authorization to your bank accounts to a stranger. That's what he did. Joseph could have wrote a check for his whole checking account and given it to a poor man walking down the street, made that guy a very rich man. But he was trusted. Joseph was put to the test, though, in verses 6 through 20. He was repeatedly tempted by Potiphar's wife. Now, let me put this into perspective. This is easy to read as a Bible story. Let's make it personal. What do you think? He was one of the most important men within the leadership of Egypt. Do you think his wife was just, or do you think she was a beautiful woman? I'm going to lean towards beautiful woman. Why? Because they were able to literally pluck women out and choose them for their wife. They could be walking through the room and say, are you married? Nope. Good. Come with me. You're my boss's new wife. What? Yep. Come with me. And there was no discussion. There was no argument. They could snatch your daughter up and just carry her off, and she was now the wife of somebody. So I guarantee you, she was not just she wasn't okay looking. She was a beautiful woman. So when she came on to Joseph, you can imagine Joseph was sitting there thinking, I'm a slave. What do you think Joseph's chances are of getting married at this point? Pretty small, pretty minuscule. And she says, I promise you no one will ever know. How many men have fallen for that trap before? Lots of them. Enough of them, in fact, that even David, even Solomon wrote through the book of Psalms, he said, or book of Proverbs, as he talked to his son, he said, be weary of the woman. He said, she'll drop honeycombs of honey just dripping all over you, but just be careful, because her end is bitter than wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. Even he knew well enough to warn his son about this kind of woman. And Joseph, as he was repeatedly tempted, I love what it describes him. I wish the Bible wrote this about me. Notice in verse 6, he says, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and he knew that not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat, and Joseph was a goodly person. Now, goodly sounds like a nice thing. Yeah, he's a good old guy. No, if you look up the word goodly, it means beautiful, handsome, good looking. My name's not in the Bible, but I wish it would say that about me. So Joseph was a handsome guy. Bible even said he was a good-looking guy. And she was a beautiful woman. But yet, he repeatedly said no. She asked continually to sleep with him. In fact, it said it was day by day. It was constant. She was wearing on him. Potiphar was the head man in charge. Again, you could imagine his wife was a woman of beauty. But Joseph knew that this sin would anger two very important people in his lives. First of all, in verse 8, he said, but he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not, or doesn't know, what is with me in the house. And he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. So he said, first of all, I can't do this sin because I'd sin against my boss. And he said, that's just not right. Now you'd sit there and go, but your boss has made you a servant over everything, but yet you own nothing. He's never given you any benefit. You have no retirement coming. He's promised you no home, nothing. So take what's yours. Take what you've earned. You ever dealt with employees like that before? They go, well, this place is making money hand over fist, and I'm barely paying my bills. I deserve that. You ever had copper go missing because of people that think like that, or have tools go missing? I'll tell you this: I've worked at car dealerships where we had cars that went missing because salesmen took them. You're thinking you're a salesman at the dealership and you stole a car from your own dealership. Yes, they did. Happened twice that I know of, and they both got caught. Unbelievably. Big surprise. But in any case, people think that they're owed something, but yet Joseph didn't look at it this way. He said, how could I do this and sin against my boss who's taken such good care of me? And secondly, how could I sin against God? In verse 9, there is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He said, so I can't do this because my integrity says I can't do this to my boss, but even more, I can't do it to God. Joseph, and we're going to put a hold on it for here because, like I said, we've got another situation to look at, and we're running out of time. But Joseph, as we look at his life here, he was a man that went from being the spoiled brat back at his dad's house to being molded into this kind of a man. He needed to learn new lessons. He needed to learn, first of all, the better part of wisdom. And God used his father's house to do that. He needed to learn integrity. While he was at home, there was nothing that wasn't his to have. He was a child that was free to take whatever he wanted. He had no bounds. He knew no limits to his desires because his dad would give him whatever he wanted. But yet he had to learn integrity here. He had to learn to be a keeper of something that belonged not to him, simply so that he could be a good steward. You know, I tell you, today as a Christian, you've been called to be a good steward of what you have. The Bible declares that nothing we have is our own. Why? Because we're a servant. You know, we haven't been sold into slavery. We gave ourselves to be a servant to the master. The story goes during these days that you had two kind of slaves. You had a slave that was there against their will and a slave that chose to be there by will. The one that chose to be there by will was called a bond slave, and Paul would call himself a bond slave. It was a person who willingly chose to be a slave, and it was not something that could be undone. And the way they signified it was by boring a hole inside your ear. Now, they didn't fill it with an earring, so you didn't go around, you know, looking like a girl or anything. You just had a hole in your ear. Because every time someone saw you, they saw that hole, they'd know that you belonged to somebody. It's kind of like putting a permanent tattoo on someone and saying, you know, putting Bobby. You know, that, I'm sorry, but you may not date Bobby anymore, but you're Bobby's for the rest of your life because it's written on your back. So it was that branding. Everyone knew you belonged to a person. And that meant you didn't own anything. You know, slaves didn't own anything. Right? But yet we're called a bond slave. We're to own nothing. We're to be nothing but a steward, but of what God's given us. And you know, I can't speak to your life as far as where God is in your life. You may be at that mountaintop, like we talked about in Sunday school. You might be at the mountaintop experience. Everything's going great, nothing to complain about. It seems like good things are just kind of falling around your ears. Or you might be in the valley experience, like he was, being a slave to a home that he didn't belong to. But in either case, God is molding. And God is changing, and God is trying to make you into the person that he one day desires you to be. We understand, just like the example of the talents. He said at the end of that, he said, unto the one that had 5 talents, he said that I gave them 10. He gives another example of this same story, and he says, unto the one that multiplied, I gave 10 cities to be in charge of. You understand that there will be places of work in heaven, and it's one of the toughest places to get a job. Once you get it, you're stuck. There's no climbing. Guess what? Because nobody retires and nobody dies. You imagine getting a job and finding out you're never going to get to move up because the guy on top of you is never going to quit. You know, I've worked at jobs where you're waiting on someone to retire just so you can get their job. Imagine working there and the guy says, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck in that job for the rest of your life. That, you know what? When we receive our inheritance in heaven, that is it. Now, I know you'll hear the story. I'd rather be a street sweeper in heaven than be, yeah, well, I understand. That's good and all. But I'd like to be something more than that too, wouldn't you? I mean, that's great. But the fact is, he promises rewards to those that serve him. I'd like to know that I get there. And if you say that's unspiritual, you're calling Paul unspiritual. He said, because I strive towards the mark. He said, I'm running the race to win. He said, I'm not running this race to come in second. I'm running to win, to fight, to obtain the prize. So if you say that's unspiritual, then Paul's unspiritual. But you know, as we look at the life of Joseph again, we see the evidences of molding. And we're going to see the last evidence tonight as he goes to the jailhouse. We're going to see the final way that he molds him. But let me make it personal again in your life. Maybe you're here and the fact is you're not saved. You sit there and you've heard stories about Christianity. You've heard people say, oh yeah, you become a Christian, everything's going to go great. I got bad news for you. It's not true. Becoming a Christian, in fact, I would say brings more trials than it does otherwise. Why? Because you're going against the flow of the world. The world's always going in the same direction. When you become a Christian, you've turned and you're headed upstream. If you've ever watched fish trying to swim upstream, it's a hard thing to do. And some of the times the bears are waiting for you to hop out of the water so they can snatch you up. It's not an easy thing to do. And becoming a Christian does mean there's going to be hard things that take place in your life. And some of the times they're just going to be a matter of circumstances, but other times they're going to be the very hand of God molding and turning and creating in you something new. And when that thing happens, you could be the opposite of Joseph. You could sit back and say, oh God, why me? Why do you let this happen to me? I don't deserve this. I try to serve you. But if you do that, you won't get to see the victory that Joseph saw at the end of his life. Joseph would have never become the second in charge. He never would have been able to feed his family. And get this, you know who would have died had he not become in this position? His brothers, his dad, his whole lineage, because they were starving when they went to Egypt. And if they hadn't saved for the famine, they'd have all died. They would have been wiped out. And the future of God literally hinged on one man's faithfulness and one man's willingness to be obedient and teachable. You know, if you're a Christian, there's generations beyond you that are going to come. You've got children, you've got grandchildren, you've got people you're going to meet and you're going to influence for Christ. And if you quit now, there may be generations that die because you don't do your job. I'd hate to know that the blood of my children and my grandchildren was on my hands because I wasn't willing to be obedient and teachable. And when the Master's hand came to mold me, I said, that hurts, stop. Joseph didn't say that. Joseph allowed himself to become teachable. And you know what? If you're unsaved today, the very first part in molding is accepting Jesus Christ, because the work doesn't start until you hand your lump of clay to the Master. That's when the work begins. But if you are saved, maybe today's the day where you realize, Lord, I don't know what's happening here, but maybe this is you molding. But it sure hurts, Lord, but I want you to mold me. Show me how to get through this. You know, for Paul, as he dealt with a thorn in the flesh, he said, Lord, man, you got to get rid of this thorn. This thing's killing me. 3 times he prayed, and the Lord said, in your weakness, my strength is shown perfect. And he said, okay, I'll take it then. Joseph was going through a lot of thorns in the flesh, but God was using it to mold him, to make him into the man he needed to be. He was being faithful to mold him into God's man. And this is a story from the Old Testament, but it's not a story. This was a real person who lived just like you do. He was flesh and blood just like us. He was merely a man, but he chose to be used. I want to invite Miss Stephanie to come up and play the piano. Again, I know that we're not necessarily finished with the lesson, as we've got a little bit more left to go tonight. But I want to ask you this. Are you allowing yourself to be molded by the hand of God? Are you kicking back against it and saying, God, no, I didn't sign up for this? Or are you like Joseph, saying, Lord, I don't know what you've got for me, but I'll do the best I can in every situation I've been given. Even in the small jobs, he was found faithful. Joseph didn't land in Potiphar's house and all of a sudden become the head man. He didn't go, hey, you're new, run the whole house. He had to prove himself. He had to work before he got there. You know, maybe it's something simple. Maybe it's something as simple as saying, I realized I'm not doing anything in this church. Give me something to do. Ask the pastor. I assure you he'll find something. Say, just give me something. I remember when I first started, I told him that, and he said, we need someone to stand in the parking lot. At the time, we had a lot of people, and that's what I did. Stood in the parking lot and told people where to park. And when they park where they shouldn't, I put a rock behind their tire. It could be something simple, but be willing to be molded. Be willing to be changed, and be willing to endure, but do all to the best of your ability. As Brother Wade comes to sing, I want to invite you, if the Lord's worked on your heart on anything, now's the time. Let's sing.
Without him I could do nothing. Without him I'd surely fail.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for listening. Just continue to pray for pastors. He's up there teaching and preaching, that the Lord would use him. And two, I know it's most of us around here that know the name, but you may not know his update. I say Brother Ketchell was moved down to Pensacola, and he's starting to make good progress. They've been able to remove his trach, and they've said that he was trying to sit up and move around. So that's such a blessing. So continue to pray for them. We're going to go ahead and finish up with prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Brother Wade, why don't you go ahead and close this out?
Father, thank you for the example that you gave us in the life of Joseph. Help us, Lord, to emulate that in our lives and to teach that to our children and our grandchildren. Lord, thank you for the man of God and thank you for the word of God. We ask you now to be with us as we go our separate ways and as we enjoy our day of rest. And Lord, bring us back at the appointed time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Before you're dismissed, are we offline? And is the recording stopped? Okay. I made a joke about Second Food Sunday not being Second Food Sunday. Well, we're working on that again for next month, but Pastor doesn't know about this. He's gone. He can't hear us, so we can talk about it. We can talk about what we want to do. Next Sunday, and I'm sorry, not next Sunday, first Sunday in July will be July 3rd. It's right at his birthday. What we want to do is move the second Sunday to the first Sunday for his birthday and do it as a surprise for him for a special birthday. We want to also take up some money to help him. He's trying to fix some things around the house. And as you guys know, the church hasn't been able to steadily pay him. So we want to raise up and do a special love offering gift for him for his birthday to tell him thank you. Because the truth is, there are a whole lot of pastors that work without consistent paychecks. But he's done it for years.